Hi, I'm with Paul Taylor, and Paul, can you please tell me a bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm an art historian and I work at the University of London in one of their departments, the Warburg Institute. And I am the curator of what they call the photographic collection. And we can talk a bit more about what that is as we proceed with the interview.
Very nice. So, since time has just started, and there's about 15 or so new art historians in the school,
Right.
what would your biggest piece of advice be for them?
Well, I think that, if you want to be an art historian, obviously you've got to go looking at as many pictures as you can. Get your eyes working on the differences between different kinds of paintings and sculptures. Go to museums as often as you can so that you can see things in the flesh, because it's always totally different when you're actually looking at them. But then another thing you've got to do is to read. And unfortunately, one of the things that any sort of person who's a professional art historian or any other kind of academic needs to do is to just soak up the books. Of course, these days we get very good at not reading an entire book, but at just sort of gutting it and finding out roughly what it says so that we don't need to read it. And that's okay too. But the main thing is to increase your knowledge. Not only your knowledge about art, but also your knowledge about the societies which produce the art and about the painters themselves and what they thought and so on. All that kind of knowledge is useful. Yeah. When you're trying to work out what's going on in a picture, which is not easy.
So what got you into it originally?
I got into it because I had a double lesson on Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling when I was at Shrewsbury, when I was at school. And we had been taught all term by a man who I won't name, who we thought was terrifically boring. And one day, happily, he was ill. And the other teacher came in, a man called John Alford. And John Alford was an absolute inspiration. I don't know how he did it, but he could just make you enthusiastic about anything which he spoke about. He talked all about the Sistine ceiling. And this was when I was doing my O-level art. And I thought, oh God, I enjoyed that so much. Maybe I'll do A-level art history. So I did. And so that's how I got on to do A-level art history. And then sort of from there, I kind of drifted into being a full-time art historian. It was a bit unexpected.
And what your experience, you went to Cambridge?
I did go to Cambridge, yeah.
What was your experience like studying it there?
Well, to begin with, actually, I didn't study history of art. I studied philosophy, because in those days, you couldn't study history of art in your first year. I don't know why they decided that, but they did. And so I studied philosophy. And then I was going to change in my second year, but I didn't because I wasn't organised enough to go and talk to the art history. Anyway, eventually I did art history in my third year. So I did just 1 year of undergraduate art history, and it was a complete panic, to be honest with you, because I was trying to get on top of a subject which all my fellow students had been studying for 2 years. But anyway, I managed to do just about well enough to go on to do a PhD.
How did you do so? Like, what was that like drive for you?
Desperation. I thought to myself, what am I going to do? Am I going to go out and be a banker? I can't do that. I'm too young. So I thought I really, really want to go on to do a PhD just because, do further graduate work. Just because I seriously, I just didn't think that I was going to be able to cope with being, sort of a banker or whatever. As it happens, I didn't get a good enough degree to be absolutely sure that I would be able to do a PhD. And so for the summer, while I was waiting to hear whether or not I would get a grant to do the PhD, I went off, I bought myself a suit and I got myself a business haircut, and I went off and got various interviews with management consultancy firms. And I was on my third interview with one of them when happily the news came through that I had got a grant and that I could go and do a PhD instead. So I wrote to the management consultancy company and said, I've decided I'm going to go for a job which is going to pay me about 1/10 of what you would pay me.
But it's your passion, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely. It was something that I enormously enjoyed, and you've got to. Obviously, if I decided to be a management consultant, then I'd be living in a 3-story, townhouse somewhere in London now, and I'd be very, very rich. But is it worth it? Well, it might be worth it for other people, but it wasn't worth it for me. And instead, I've had how long have I been? About 35 years of being an art historian, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Does a small part of you regret not taking up the job because the money would have been pretty great?
No.
No.
As it happens, I had a good friend who went and worked for the same company later, and she said that it was just awful. So I wasn't sort of too worried about that. But no, I never wanted to work in business. I really didn't.
Yeah.
I was only doing it because I had to put, I had to pay the rent somehow.
Okay, cool. So iconography. You're giving a talk later on it. Could you just give me a background on what iconography is?
Well, iconography is studying what pictures mean. I mean, you can look at a picture and you can see all the lovely colours and so on, and you can see the people in it, and you can say, oh, well, that's really nice. But then there's another question, and that is, what's the subject of it? What's it meant to be? And it might be, the death of Achilles or the crucifixion of Christ. But most paintings in the past had a particular meaning within the culture that produced them, and we forget those meanings because there are so many of them. It's so complex to know them all. Anyway, I might not have really got interested in iconography, except I landed this job at the Warburg Institute a long time ago, and I got a job in their photographic collection. And in their photographic collection, we have 400,000 photographs of works of art, and they're all filed away by what the subject was at the time. Right? So we got about 18,000 different folders with all the different subjects that people had, and our job is to help people to use the collection if they're trying to find out what a subject is, and also, our job is to be on top of the stuff ourselves, so that we actually know about iconography. So, I mean, okay, I got into iconography just because it's my day job. And again, I had to, be paid somehow, and this was a job, and I wasn't going to say no to it, especially not at the Warburg Institute, which I'd always really liked. And so, yeah, I became an expert just because that was how my job turned out.
Fair. So, the talk you're giving later, what specifically is that talking about?
Well, it's just called What is Iconography? And I'm going to give a number of different examples of what iconographers do. And I'm not just going to talk about European iconography, I'm going to talk about non-European iconography too. And then I'm going to talk about the iconography of photographs, because often when people talk about iconography, they think it's something that only applies to old-fashioned paintings. But actually, all modern photographs have iconographers too. Every image has an iconographer. And so that's sort of, what I'm going to be just generally talking about. I'm going to tell everyone in the room that they are, in fact, themselves iconographers. They might not have realised it, but they are. They do it all the time. They're always dealing with the meanings of images, and so, yeah.
Well, would you say, I know it's a pretty broad question, but the main difference between modern iconography and probably like 1900s, 1800s iconography?
Yeah, I think one big difference actually is that in the past, people used to keep returning to the same subject over and over again, right? You get loads of paintings of the Annunciation to the Virgin Mary of the birth of Christ, right? I mean, there are thousands and thousands of them. But as time has gone by, and it was a process that began in the 18th century, in fact, but then sort of, has increased, images tend to be much more individual of what their meanings are. I mean, artists today don't just repeat a story that's been done in the past. They want to make up their own ideas and come up with their own notions of what an image is. And we don't tend to repeat stories in the same way that we used to. And that makes a big difference for someone like me who works in a photographic collection, because we have folders which all contain the same story or the same image, right? And you can't do that anymore. I mean, if I was to try and get all the different photographs in the world and file them away, I couldn't do it. It would just be impossible because, the whole idea of how images are made has changed. So that's a big difference. Yeah.
Do you think, that transition from, talking about like religion and, Greek myths to modern day, do you think that's because we're being more original or maybe more vulgar?
I think that we are certainly being more original, I think that one thing that means, not that we're being more vulgar, but it means that we have less culture in common. I mean, back in the past, almost any peasant in Europe would have recognised an Annunciation to the Virgin when they walked into a church. It wouldn't have been difficult. There are very few images today which we all have in common. I mean, you know, you can have, you know, a scene from your favourite film, right? You go, whoa, yeah, I know exactly what's going on there. And I have a scene from my favourite film. Chances are you haven't seen my favourite film and I haven't seen yours, you know? So the whole way that imagery is being produced is just breaking up into what we each individually sort of, you know, take on as our culture. So, yeah, our common visual culture has sort of, you know, fallen to pieces.
So would you say it's a good thing or not?
Well, it means that we all get to see what we want to see, and we don't have religion forced down our throats, and you know, and we can all choose our own, you know, we can all choose our own imagery in a way. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a thing. You know, I mean, it still seems to have happened. I mean, there are still things that we can all recognise, more or less. I mean, you know, we can all recognise images of the current US president normally. And, you know, there are a few things that we all know what we're looking at. But by and large, yeah, imagery is much more broken up than it used to be.
Okay, fair. All right, so people going into jobs these days, how would you describe it? Like, is it... what is the piece of scholarship you're most proud of writing?
Okay. Okay, well, actually, the piece of scholarship that I've written that I'm most proud of has not been read by very many people, I think. And it's only a very short piece. It's about 10 pages long, I think. And it's got loads of illustrations, so the text is really quite sparse. But it's called Michelangelo's Mistakes. And I discovered that on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, going back to the Sistine Chapel ceiling, if you look at the figures of the ancestors of Christ, they all have their names next to them, right? But when you get to the middle of the ceiling, you discover that one of the names is missing. Okay, they all have 3 names, and then one of them only has 2 names. And why should that be? Why are there only 2 names? And there's an answer to that question, which is that earlier on, he had left out the name of Isaac. All right. When he was painting all of the names of the ancestors, he left one of them out at the beginning. So then what was he going to do? Well, he could have gone around repainting them all, except that the Pope at the time was telling him that if he didn't finish the ceiling pronto, he was going to have him thrown off the scaffold, right? So he thought, oh, sod it. So what he did was he painted Isaac in between Abraham and Jacob. I mean, and it looked really crap. And we know it looked crap because there are early prints which were made after it, okay? Now, that whole little lunette with those names on has been destroyed, and it was destroyed by Michelangelo himself. When he painted the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, he knocked out the lunette where he'd screwed up. All right? And my theory is that that's why he knocked out the lunette, because he knew he'd screwed up. And so I was very, very happy to have been, I think, the first person to have noticed that.
Fair. So wait, when did you find that?
2004, I think.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just started thinking, hold on, why are there only 2 names there? And once you start thinking why there are only 2 names there, then the whole thing began to unravel.
Yeah, so, I mean, he's so famous, and that's such a well-known piece.
It's nice to know that even the greatest geniuses can you know, make complete cock-ups, just like, you know, like we can.
But like, it makes you think we could have gone for ages and not found that.
Well, that's what had happened. And also there are lots of articles which try to interpret the exact identity of each ancestor without realising that actually the whole lot is one ancestor out anyway, because he messed up. Yeah. They assume that he intended to, you know, refer to that particular ancestor. And in fact, he made 2 other mistakes as well, but that's the most conspicuous one.
Okay. So going back to your position, what qualities would, so someone going into this profession, what qualities should they have?
Well, I think it'd be a good idea if you really love the subject, because, I mean, you know, art historians don't get paid all that much. I mean, all the people who were at Cambridge with me, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times as rich as I am, that doesn't bother me. But it better not bother you either, you know. I mean, if that's the kind of thing that's going to get to you, then don't go into art history, because there aren't very many well-paid jobs in it. But yeah, the main thing is you better just sort of, you know, get pretty excited looking at works of art, because if you don't, you're going to get bored quite fast. But it's a certain kind of thing where, yeah, you just, you know, fall in love with things, and you just want to talk about them and think about them and look at them, and that's great. And that makes it a really wonderful profession, you know. if you're lucky enough to be able to pursue it.
Fair enough. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Awesome.